easy for me to prepare the rebuttal section with slides because I've heard Dr. Quinn's remarks previously, and typically the proponents of Common Core say the same things. They recite the selling points from the developers, and they're pretty easy to dispel. So I'm going to start with this idea that it was state-led. And Jane pointed out the fact that we believe it was actually Gates-led rather than states-led because of all the money that's gone into it. And it went back as far as 1999. So as far as it having been led by the state or the National Governors Association, and the idea that, you know, the rationale for the Governors Association to develop the standards was to close achievement gaps. Well, I'm here to tell you that if they really wanted to close achievement gaps, they would have looked at the math standards in California. Zev Werman, who developed the math standards in California, has several slides that I can make available to you that show that they closed the achievement gaps in California. They brought the less knowledgeable students up because they did the opposite of Common Core. What they did was they expected every child to do Algebra 1 in 8th grade, which is the opposite of what Common Core does. It expects every child to do Algebra 1 in 9th grade. And they were successful in closing the achievement gaps with that approach. I think you've already seen that slide. They like to say over and over again that it's not a federal program. Well, the truth of the matter is they were coerced by the Race to the Top grants. States signed on often before the standards were even, the final draft was even finished, for a chance to get federal money. So our state committed our students to the Common Core standards that way. And the No Child Left Behind waivers. Then there's the $360 million for the two testing consortia. And we all know that the test drives what's taught in the classroom. So if the federal government is controlling the test, he is controlling what's being taught in our classrooms. There's also been recent threats to Title I funding. So you tell me how in the world it's not a federal program if they're threatening to withhold our Title I funds in South Carolina. And our legislature can tell you about that because those are the threats that they've been hearing. And then there are two former Gates staff that are in top level positions in the U.S. Department of Education. They also like to say this a lot, the standards are not curriculum. And, you know, that's just nonsense. And you don't have to have a PhD to understand this. Again, it's about the test. Whatever is on the test, what's going to be tested, is what's going to be taught in the classroom. So the tests are aligned to the standards. So you can bet the curriculum is going to include whatever the standards require. And for that matter, we've got this experimental approach to geometry. So if a math teacher decides, well, I don't want to teach this, I want to go back to the way we did it previously, they can't do that because the standards require this experimental approach to geometry. Same way with the classic literature and the informational text that you heard about. If a teacher decides she wants to teach 80% classic literature, she's not able to do that because the standards bind her to that. And like I said, the school districts, the schools, and the teachers will all be evaluated by the outcomes of the test. So you can't tell me that they're going to veer from the standards as far as curriculum selection. They also like to say that national standards will provide this equitable comparison across states. And you heard Dr. Quinn talk about how South Carolina's always gotten a bad rap because we had, I guess she was saying we had higher standards, and therefore when you compare us to other states, we didn't fare well. Well, the truth of the matter is, we did have some very rigorous standards in South Carolina. They were called PACT, P-A-C-T, you may recall. We quickly abandoned PACT and lowered our standards for the current standards, which is PASS, because of the disaster of No Child Left Behind. So we have had rigorous standards in this state, and we can have them again. We're not saying throw out Common Core and let's go to something inferior. If we want the best standards in the country, then we would adopt the California math standards. If we want the most rigorous standards in the country for ELA, we could go to the Massachusetts website today and download the standards and the test free of charge. So if we truly want rigor, and we don't want common standards, one size fits all, then that's exactly what our state could do, and it could do it immediately. They also like to say that teachers, parents, experts, administrators were all consulted in the development of the standards. Well, this is what our facts say, is that there were 3 people on each writing team, none of whom were teachers, parents, and administrators. There were 29 people on the writing work group who were primarily staff of ACT and College Board and the chief, and you can go and look this up. There was 1 teacher among them. There were 25 people on the validation committee. Only one was the mathematician, Professor Milgram, that we spoke about earlier, who did not sign off on the standards. 5 of the validation committee members did not sign off on the standards. And in addition to that, one of the things that Professor Stotzi talks about as she travels the country is how convoluted and fake the whole process was. That they gave remarks, that they suggested changes, and none of these were accepted. They moved forward with the standards the way a small group of individuals wanted them to come out. And no one from South Carolina was on the development team. Furthermore, the standards were adopted under false pretenses. And this comes from Professor Stotzi. This was a comparative review that was done by educators in South Carolina. And what she found when she was here with us, and this is hard to read, but they compared, this particular page shows they compared pre-calculus as being 100% aligned with the current South Carolina standards. There is no pre-calculus standards. I'm not sure where Dr. Quinn's getting her information from, but Jane Robbins has studied this for years, and it's been my knowledge, and Professor Milgram also says there is no pre-calculus in the standards. Not only that, Algebra 2, which is the highest level of math in the standards, is not even a complete year of Algebra 2. Furthermore, there was a statement in the standards that said that the math standards set rigorous definition of college and career readiness. And if I had Wi-Fi, I would play this video for you. Many of you have probably already seen it. But this is Jason Zimba, who was the lead author of the math standards, and he is testifying before the Massachusetts State Board of Education. And he says to this State Board of Education, when asked, that the math standards will not get a student in a 4-year college. It's on this video. He has admitted it publicly, and it's the truth. They only prepare for 2-year junior and technical colleges because of this issue with math. So the standards in our state, because that report that I showed you a moment ago was what was used for the State Board of Education for reference to adopt the standards. So there was false information in that comparative review, and therefore the standards were adopted under false pretenses. And here again is the slide that Jane showed earlier about the early childhood experts. This is a joint statement that dozens of educators, pediatricians, developmental psychologists, researchers, including many of the most prominent members of their field. We had the president of the Alliance for Childhood come to the Senate hearing, and she testified before the Senate about this. And it's interesting to me that one first-grade teacher's opinion that has been solicited for this forum is going to be held up against all of these experts. And I can tell you that hundreds of parents across the state have contacted us and reached out to us and told us devastating stories about their children. So I think it is shameful for anybody to suggest that these experts are not correct and these parents are not correct in what they're witnessing with their children. This is probably the worst thing about the standards, and I can't imagine that anybody would turn a blind eye to potential psychological damage to young children. It is appalling. And I'm going to have about 30 seconds remaining if Jane wants to add something. Okay, good. Well, thank you. We'll end on that note.